So this is the first community budget forum for our 24-25 budget. You've seen very similar information a few times here at the board, but this is an opportunity to share the status of budget development with the community. The slides that we're going to go through are first the proposed budget for next year, some budget and tax levy history, as well as our calculation for the tax cap and the tax rate for next year, enrollment trends, and some recent staffing reductions in recent years, the expenditure changes in some broad categories for next year's budget, our fund balance, as well as a summary of the items that will be voted on in the budget vote, and then an opportunity for any questions or comments. So this current status of the draft budget includes projected revenues of $23,571,895 and projected expenditures of $24,963,903, which results in a budget deficit of $1,392,008, which we've applied appropriated fund balance to fill that deficit at this point. Some key assumptions that are included in this draft budget that could change before the time the board adopts the budget on April 23rd are first that at this point we've included a 3.5% tax levy increase. Depending on what happens with the state budget and state aid, the board could decide to change that before they actually adopt the budget. We've included a 10% assumption for increases on our health insurance. We're down to 16 from 19, so we're continuing to work on that with our health insurance broker. And again, this budget is based on state aid per the executive budget proposal. If we receive information that has changed when the budget is adopted, we can update these numbers. This shows the last 4 years as well as the proposed year total amount of the adopted budget and what percent it increased, what percent and dollar value it increased from the prior year, as well as the tax levy for each of those years and the percent and dollar value increase. You'll see that last year we had a significant increase in the budget of 5.98%. This year we're back down to 3%, which is pretty consistent with years in the past. What we have struggled with in recent years is that our expenditures are increasing at a faster rate than our revenues. There are really three primary sources of revenue that fund the majority of our budget. Taxes, well really two, taxes and state aid. This is the tax cap calculation, and I see that I didn't change the year on the top of the slide. I apologize for that. The calculation for the tax cap indicates that our tax levy limit for next year is $7,393.56, which is a 2.26% increase in the tax levy. The board has at this point decided to include in the draft budget 3.5% for a proposed levy of $7,483,050, which exceeds the cap by about $90,000 or 1.24%. Any questions at this point? Okay. This slide shows the impact on a property which is assessed at $155,000. There's a few assumptions in this slide. One, it assumes that the total taxable value in the district doesn't change. We don't know what the new taxable value will be until the new assessment rolls are adopted, and I think that usually happens in the May timeframe. It also assumes that this is the rate and the increase for a property that's at 100% equalization rate. Several years ago, we had several towns in our district that had 100% equalization rates. Currently, we don't have any. The further you go below 100% equalization rate, that increase will get higher. So just to put it in perspective, for the current year's budget, the town of Walton, where most of our property owners are, had a 77% equalization rate. So the increase for them on a $155,000 house would actually calculate out to $72 because their equalization rate is below the 100%. So the further you go below the 100%, the greater the increase is going to be on a $155,000 assessed property. This slide compares state aid that we have in this year's budget compared to state aid that is included in the proposed budget. For the most part, these state aids match what's in the executive proposal. You will find if you compare those budget runs to what's in the budget, there are a few categories that are different. Those are primarily excess cost aid, which is budgeted at $120,000. The numbers in the executive budget proposal are a 3-year average, and we calculate each year what we anticipate our aid to be next year, so we have a better idea of what we anticipate our aid will actually be. The other number that is different, I believe, is transportation aid. We are expecting some differences in that aid for 2 reasons. One, because our expenses are higher this year than anticipated, primarily due to transportation for special education students. And also, we are anticipating that our transportation aid gets reduced based on the percentage of our miles that are regular route miles versus other miles, like athletic miles or field trip miles or staff going to a conference miles. And we have done John has done a number of things to decrease those miles. So we're hoping that the percentage that we get aided will be higher because of the steps that we've taken to decrease those miles. For example, we determined that it's less expensive for us to reimburse if I'm going somewhere, it's less expensive to reimburse me mileage to take my personal vehicle than it is to clock those miles and have them offset our transportation aid. Any questions on that slide? You do see that textbook aid, software aid, library aid, and hardware aid all are decreasing. Those aids are a per pupil aid, so as our population goes down, those aids will decrease as well. This slide just shows the enrollment trend of the district going back to 2010, when there were 1,050 students, and this year we're at 835. So this affects not only those enrollment-driven aids, but also other calculations related to our title funding and things like that. This slide, when we're trying to address the issue with our expenditures increasing faster than our revenues, there's a couple approaches that we can take. We do have the option of increasing taxes. We do also have the option of decreasing expenditures. And this slide is to just show that the district has really looked at positions over the last several years, and where we've been able to, we've reduced positions. All of these reductions occurred as a result of resignations or retirements, so there were no layoffs in order to accomplish these, but Dr. McDonald has started a process of every time we have a vacancy, really looking at that position and determining whether or not there's ways to accomplish that work without a new hire. So with Dr. McDonald's assistance, we went through and tried to take into account all the shifts of personnel and really look at where different positions have been eliminated or are planned to be eliminated in the next budget. This slide lumps our expenditures into several categories. These categories are established by the Office of the State Controller. They're used by all the school districts, all municipalities, towns, villages. So the first category is personal services, so that's wages. Our budget last year was $9.6 million, and the proposed budget is 9.7, an increase of about $83,000 or 0.9%. We do have contracts with our Teachers Association as well as our support personnel that have wage increases that are higher, but due to adjustments and position reductions and some attrition, when we have a higher paid individual retire, we have some savings because we anticipate the new hire will be at a lower rate. So there's a number of things that are playing into the fact that our increase is not as great as some of our salary increases in those agreements. Our equipment budget is relatively stable. The items included in the equipment budget for next year include some athletic equipment as well as the purchase of a vehicle for the transportation department. Contractual has increased $253,000 or close to 11%. The primary driver there is our contracted out special education transportation that I mentioned earlier, which is also affecting us this year. BOCES increase is almost 113,000 or about 3%. Our benefit budgets are increasing only 0.2%. So even though this includes health insurance, retirement, unemployment, workers' comp, all those sorts of things. So even though we're anticipating a double-digit increase in health insurance, we have some other areas that have decreased in expenses. So the overall increase is not as great. One example of that is when our employees retire, they stay on our active employee health plan until they turn 65, which is much more expensive than our Medicare supplement plan that they go on when they turn 65. We've seen a significant reduction in the number of employees retirees that are still on the active plan, so they're on a less expensive plan because more of our retirees are now over 65. And the other significant reduction there, I would say, is that we have an increasing number of employees taking the health insurance buyout, which is less expensive than a health insurance plan, particularly in our support personnel. The other increase, significant increases in debt service and transfers of $259,000 or 18.5%. There's two primary drivers for this. One is, as we've done capital projects, obviously our debt service payments for those are increasing. We are seeing an increase on our building aid as well that offsets that, but it does increase the budget side, the expense side. And the other item that's driving that is we are seeing more students more special education students have extended school year services, which involves transportation and tuition and things like that. We pay 20% of that cost, and that gets paid out of a separate fund, so we have to transfer that money to that fund, but it shows up here in our general fund budget. When we ended last year, we had a fund balance of just over, an unassigned fund balance of just over $2 million. We added back the amount that we were appropriating this year's budget of 1.4, and then subtracted what we actually anticipate we'll use, which is about 500,000, and then deduct what we're appropriating to next year, which projects our June 30th unassigned fund balance at about 1.5 million, which is roughly 6.3%. In earlier meetings in the fall and January-ish timeframe, the Finance Committee had talked about the target of trying not to let that go below 6%. And this draft budget accomplishes that.
So the 1.5 million as of 6/30/24 in our fund balance, the 24-25, you're using over $1 million of that to help offset the budget, correct?
I'm taking that out already.
Okay, you take, okay, all right.
The budget vote is May 21st at the budget bus garage from 9 to noon. There will be three different.
Noon to 9.
Sorry.
I know.
Noon to 9. There will be three different, actually 4 different items on the budget. The first to be voted on. The first being approval of the budget. The second being the purchase of 365 passenger buses. So in the past we have leased all our buses. We're actually planning to purchase the next 3 as opposed to lease them. Kind of playing into the conversation we were having earlier, it gives us some more options. I think this is a little sooner than what had been mentioned earlier as far as we plan to purchase, but it gives us some more flexibility as we navigate the electric bus landscape. The library budget is also a separate proposition that will be on our on the ballot to be voted on. That's not something that the district recommends or has any input on. It's provided to us by the library board. And then lastly, there are 2 seats for the Board of Education that are also to be voted on. Petitions to run for a board seat need to be turned in no later than 5 p.m. on April 22nd. And once the board adopts the draft budget on April 23rd, all of the budget information will be available in our offices and uploaded on the website so that folks can take a look at it. Any questions?
Can I make a comment?
You sure can.
I think that one thing, because you have a future presentation as well.
We have a budget hearing.
Would be to just communicate the fiscal stress calculations that I know you've done in the past, because I think one of the parameters is we're operating at a loss, basically. We continue to operate at a loss. But one of the parameters is if you operate for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, then you start to get into the points, and then you start to get into these fiscal stress categories. So it doesn't come across right now, but I think that we should make it clear to the community that we are moving into greater fiscal stress by continuing to operate at a loss and continuing to equal to our fund balance. Because the rate that we're currently tracking is not sustainable.
I anticipate that when we have the public hearing on the budget, that those slides will pretty much look like this with any updates, and I can certainly add one with that information.
Because that's my biggest concern. We keep taking out of that fund balance, and the day is gonna come that that fund balance is not gonna be there, and there's gonna be a big bill at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's gotta be picked down, and either somebody's gonna pay a lot more taxes to cover it, or we're gonna start cutting. Somebody's gonna take a sharp pen and cut jobs, and
And I think that's, that's part of the reason it's really important as we move forward. The budget's gonna get adopted, the budget's gonna get by the board, and it'll get voted on, and we'll move forward. But as we, when it's October, we should be thinking about what is this doing to our long-term expenses as we make other decisions, as other decisions come up, and as we continue to evaluate when there's a retirement or a resignation, does this position have to be filled? Because taking small steps to address that problem is going to be much more pleasant than having to take really
Exactly.
drastic steps to address that.
Is that something that we might be able to add to the budget newsletter?
Well, we can, it's your budget newsletter, so you can
That's
add,
something that we can put out
we can certainly look
in
into
a
the
simple
narrative.
format, people can understand it easily.
What I would do this year.
That's funny.
With the complexity of what we're talking about and the concern for future financial planning is my section of narrative that I typically do, I will bring to the board with the draft prior to, we'll get it earlier, and we'll take a look at it as a group, and we'll make sure that we get the exact explanation and detail that the board wants community this year. Typically, I just do my thing, and you see it when it's done and drafted. This year, I'll bring it to you as a draft, so we can communicate it together. How's that? Okay.
And maybe something we could highlight in that when we talk about it is, we talked a couple times about position reductions, but that's not the only step that we've taken to control costs. Our move to the high deductible health insurance plan was a step that we took to control costs. Our move back to printing a lot of things here from Print Shop was a step to control cost, and that's resulted in about $40,000 in savings from last year's budget to this year's budget, so to the proposed budget. So there's a number of things, and those are just some of the bigger ticket ones that we're doing our due diligence on our end. It's not like we're just saying, oh, we need to increase taxes. I think we're trying to approach this from multiple directions.
If I remember right, the adjustment on the healthcare to go into a high deductible loan was like $800 and some thousand was the difference between what was going to be projected and what we ended up with. So I think that as a group, everyone, I think that we've done an excellent job of avoiding spikes by making changes that maybe everybody doesn't understand have been made behind the scenes. But one of these appropriately adjusting staff and resources and healthcare adjustments, things like that, has been very active with this group, and hats off to the admin team for being proactive in that, because one of the missions we gave them is let's avoid the spikes, right? Let's not have a big spike. 3.5% is sounds like it's above your cap because they put it out as 2% cap. If you look at it at 1.24 above that, that's not a huge spike. We have ability at 1% to garner 76,000 in revenue. So we're just over that at 89,000, just over your cap. And I think that's an effort to take the spike off of years coming. It's not a complete solve, but it is that in combination with having those talks in October for future planning, always continually looking out 3 to 5 years to avoid those spikes is, I think, what everybody has done an excellent job, at least in the last 7 years I'm aware of. So we just have to keep on that track and really not lose focus of that, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot easier to make small adjustments. I agree with you 100%. Taxpayers don't like shocks.
And to Kevin's point, we're not out of the woods. We're not headed in the right direction. We're taking steps to try and address it, but it's not something that we can stop looking at or thinking about. And recently at a business officials meeting, all the DCMO districts kind of went around and said, where's your tax levy going to be? Where's your tax levy going to be? And while none of the other districts necessarily indicated they were planning to exceed the cap, there were several districts that have increases that are higher than the 3.5%. So I certainly don't think the 3.5% is out of the realm of the norm. I believe Hancock's is going to be over 4%.
And I always like to put a dollar figure with that percentage, because when you hear anything over 2, people think that you've exceeded the cap, when in reality, it could be So I like to put a dollar figure in that, what was it, $80,000,
Right.
89,000 is associated with that 3%. So just to kind of give the taxpayers an idea that, you know, that's what that represents.
And so many other things, health insurance, retirement, wages are going up more than 2%.
Right. Yeah, you look at that chart that you had, it was basically nothing under that, under 2%.
Right.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
it's.
Yep.
Well, you look at personnel and benefits, so in the areas where you have the most cost, you've increased by least amount.
Yeah, because we've made
Yeah.
cuts and
So
adjustments.
our typical contractual for transportation, of, needs students, things like that, and those transfers you spoke about are your highest two areas.
Right.
Thank you.